All right, so some good news to report. Let's see. So the title of this article is New York City agrees to pay $13 million to 2020 racial injustice protesters in historic class action. So, yeah, it's the BLM protests of 2020. Anyway, so the article begins. New York City has agreed to pay more than $13 million to settle a civil rights lawsuit brought on behalf of roughly 1,300 people who were arrested or beaten by police during racial injustice demonstrations that swept through the city during the summer of 2020. If approved by a judge, the settlement, which was filed in Manhattan federal court Wednesday, would be among the most expensive payouts ever awarded in a lawsuit over mass arrests, experts said. The lawsuit focused on 18 of the many protests that erupted in New York City in the week following the killing of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis. With certain exceptions, people arrested or subjected to force by NYPD officers at those events will each be eligible for $9,950 in compensation, according to attorneys for the plaintiffs. The agreement, one of several stemming from the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, allows the city to avoid a trial that could be both expensive and politically fraught. It comes as many other cities across the U.S. are negotiating their own settlement with protesters who spilled into the streets to decree racist police brutality after Floyd's death, a period of unrest that saw 10,000 people arrested in the span of a few days. Attorneys with the National Lawyers Guild, which represented the plaintiffs in New York, accused NYPD leaders of depriving protesters of their First Amendment rights through a coordinated campaign of indiscriminate brutality and unlawful arrests. Through more than 2 years of litigation, attorneys for the city maintained that police were responding to a chaotic and unprecedented situation, pointing to some unruly protests in which police vehicles were set on fire and officers pelted with rocks and plastic bottles. Yet none of that seemed to happen at January 6th insurrection. I can't imagine what the difference is. Granted, I don't think anything was set on fire on January 6th, but there was plenty of attacking of police. A spokesperson for the NYPD deferred questions to the city's law department, which did not respond to requests for comment. During some of the 2020 protest marches, officers deployed a crowd control tactic known as kettling against peaceful protesters, corralling them in tight spaces and attacking them with batons and pepper spray, before making mass arrests. Adama Sow, one of the named plaintiffs in the lawsuit, said their group of marchers were trapped by police without warning. Sow and the other arrestees were placed in zip ties until their hands turned purple, then held in a sweltering correctional bus for several hours. Yeah, because that's totally okay. Even if they were violent, which, according to this, they weren't, the people they actually did this to weren't, that is still wrong. I don't care if you're violent. You don't do that to people. My God. It was so disorganized but so intentional, Sow said. They seemed set on traumatizing everyone. Again, I do not know what could possibly be the difference between this and January 6th. I just cannot put my finger on it. The city invoked qualified immunity, which protects police officers from lawsuits stemming from lawful work performed in the line of duty, and defended the decision to arrest medics and legal observers as within the rights of the department. Just because it's within your rights doesn't mean it's okay. Slavery used to be legal, but guess what? It wasn't okay then, and it's not now. I don't see why this is why I don't like it when people say, If people don't like something, people will be like, well, it's legal. Well, yeah, that doesn't say anything. There were a lot of shitty things that used to be legal. That doesn't mean that they were okay at one point. It just means that the vast majority of asshats were, well, asshats and passed horrible laws. So, yeah, that's great that it's within your rights, but that doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do. While attorneys for the plaintiffs cited past crackdowns on large demonstrations, including during the 2004 Republican National Convention, as evidence of long-standing systemic violations by the NYPD, attorneys for the city said there was no systemic effort to deprive people of their right to protest. Oh, sounds like it was. Because are you telling me that either you're telling me that the New York Police Department is overrun with racists in this one department, or they were taught to treat certain people this way? Because either way, it's not a good look for the department. But yeah, you don't have a good choice here, dude. There is no history or present or future of unconstitutional policing. Georgia Pestana, an attorney for the city, wrote in a memo. There is no frequent deprivation of constitutional rights. I'm sorry, wasn't it under Giuliani that police were targeting black people? Are you sure you want to say there was never any history of unconstitutional policing? Are you really sure you want to go that route? Because you don't have to look far to actually get to that. Okay. The lawsuit named former Mayor Bill de Blasio, I forgot about him, and retired NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea, as well as other police leaders as defendants. Under the settlement agreement, neither the city nor the NYPD is required to admit any wrongdoing. Well, it's great that they're getting money to compensate for what was done to them, but I don't know. I don't like that the NYPD can basically continue to pretend that they never did anything wrong, like they are doing now. Protesters who were arrested on certain charges, including trespassing, property destruction, assaulting an officer, arson, or weapons possession, will be excluded from the settlement. Well, that makes sense. Those who were seen on video blocking police from making arrests may also be ineligible. You know, I have mixed emotions about that. I mean, why were they blocking the police? Were they blocking the police from abusing their power? Or were they just being asshats? Because I would think that those who are blocking police from abusing their power should be probably part of the settlement. Those that just, wanted people to create chaos and wanted to prevent the police from stopping that chaos. Yeah, I could see why they should be ineligible. They are no better than those who were rioting. I'm fine with that. Unlike some other lawsuits related to the 2020 protests, the class action was not meant to force the NYPD to change its practices. Well, why the hell not? There are several other lawsuits aimed at injunctive relief that are ongoing, including one brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, God, I love her, that calls for a federal monitor to oversee the NYPD's policing of protests. Okay, so that makes sense. There are other lawsuits that are handling that part of the situation, so there's no reason for the class action lawsuit to bring it up. That makes sense. Another class action settlement announced earlier this year would award $21,500 to those arrested by police during one demonstration in the Bronx, a payout that could total around $10 million, including legal fees. Separately, more than 600 people have brought individual claims against New York City related to police action during the 2020 protest. According to the city's comptroller, Brad Lander, roughly half of them have resulted in settlements and resolutions, costing the city nearly $12 million to date. Wiley Stecklow, an attorney for the protesters in the class action lawsuit, said the growing cost to taxpayers should serve as a red flag for city leaders about the NYPD's inability to correct its decades-old problem with constitutionally compliant protest policing. While the arc of the moral universe is indeed long, sometimes it needs reform to bend towards justice, he said. And that is a famous quote, that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So, I have mixed emotions about this. Now, on one hand, this shows those who have black and white thinking that because a liberal city like New York still has racism, so it's not like all the racists are on the Republican side. There are plenty of racists in liberal America. Now, that doesn't mean each and every one of these officers are liberal. I'm just talking about the city in general. You know, people seem to think that if it's a liberal city, then that must mean that racists don't exist or something. You know, sort of like the thinking that racism was defeated because Obama got elected, because somehow that makes sense. So, on the one hand, this shows that just because it's a liberal city doesn't mean it doesn't have a problem with racism. And if you didn't know that, you're living under a rock, because that's been going on since the 90s? Yeah, it must be the 90s. But, on the other hand, Jesus Christ, New York, get your shit together. What the hell? Why obviously, if this shit has been going on from the 90s and nobody has to take accountability, nobody has to change anything, at what point are you going to realize that this isn't just a few horrible people, that it's the system? I mean, you've heard of black police officers treating black potential suspects like crap. It's not because they are self-loathing, or maybe they are, they could be, but it's because the system tells them these are the types of people you should be looking out for, and completely oblivious to the fact that, oh, actually I qualify. Maybe I shouldn't take that so literally. So, seriously, New York, how many freaking decades does it take before you, I don't know, deal with this problem? Unless you want to bankrupt your own city because they keep having to make all these payouts to people that you violate their constitutional rights with. Because if that's the goal, is to bankrupt the city, then you're doing a stellar job doing that. But I don't know, maybe you might want to consider, not doing that. Because, I mean, why? Why are you still doing that? If for no other reason, you should have the wherewithal to realize, okay, we've been doing it this way since the 90s. We've been getting into trouble for doing it since the 90s. Maybe we should change something. And but then again, there are people who are like, nope, not us. It has nothing to do with the system. Must be a few bad apples. Is what's preventing you from taking a hard look at your system and realizing, maybe we should change this, because The way we're training people isn't good. Because, like I said, we had the opposite problem on January 6th. Nobody wanted to attack except for that one protester who ended up getting killed. But except for that one police officer who, actually treated a violent insurrection like a violent insurrection, nobody else wanted to harm the protesters. It's like, what's the difference here? Can't imagine. Seriously, figure shit out. Just because the protesters are black does not mean you have to treat them like crap. Just because protesters are white doesn't mean you have to treat them with kid gloves. Treat them as the violent monsters that they deserve. If a person is protesting peacefully, then maybe not be violent towards them. Just a thought. Because what the fuck? So anyway, that's all I have for this article. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.